Hello everyone and welcome to a very nice game that was played in round 2 of the Niksic tournament of 1983, back then played in Yugoslavia, and it features Garry Kasparov versus Tigran Petrosian. Kasparov was becoming stronger and stronger on his way to challenge Anatoly Karpov for the World Chess Championship that was supposed to be set in 1984, and he was already incredibly strong, much higher rated than others in the tournament, and the tournament featured 15 extremely strong grandmasters. It was a 14 player round robin, and featured 3 former world champions and obviously 1 future one. And the lineup, I mean, it's really incredible, as it features the older generation versus the newer generation. So you had Kasparov, you had Larsen, Spassky, Portish, Tony Miles, Ulf Andersson, Tal also played in this tournament, Jan Timan, Yasser Serevan, Ljubomir Ljubojevic, Svetozar Gligoric, Tigran Petrosian, here former world champion, Predrag Nikolic, Gyula Saks, and Božidar Ivanovic. And yeah, just an outstanding tournament, the one that I always wanted to cover, as it featured just an incredible performance by future world champion Garry Kasparov. Only 2 players that are missing, well, one for reasonable reasons, the other one for, well, it's hard to say unreasonable reasons, but they are reasons. World champion Anatoly Karpov at the time, who played a different championship also in 1983, the USSR Championship, but also, as I imagine, preparing for the World Chess Championship match against Kasparov. The younger adversary, who I guess was also preparing by playing very, very strong events. And one player that was invited to this tournament is none other than Bobby Fischer. However, Bobby Fischer required, or rather demanded, $30,000 just as an appearance fee to participate in the tournament, which was of course denied by the organizers. Although if you account for standard inflation, it would be maybe like $90,000 or $100,000 today. But if you account for actual purchasing power, let's say if you wanted to buy an apartment or a house, it would be more like asking for $200,000 today for an appearance fee, which was quite a lot, as you haven't played chess for a very long time, and it was just weird. But yeah, of course, everyone was used to Fischer making such demands. Unfortunately for us, the viewers, Fischer was not participating in this tournament. But yeah, other than Fischer and Karpov, all the other top guys are here. And this is the first game I'm going to cover from the tournament, Kasparov versus Petrosian. This is the second round of the match. First round, Kasparov actually faced Yasser Serevan, which we also will cover, but this is the first game that I checked. I don't know why, I was really interested in it, and it's a really nice game. So yeah, let's check it out. Kasparov with white opens with pawn to d4. Former world champion replies with pawn to e6, goes for the Horwitz defense. I guess trying to get Kasparov to maybe go e4, or maybe just to think about it. Maybe he will go e4, maybe he will go c4, maybe some other moves. But against Tigran, he goes for pawn to c4, and now Tigran goes pawn to f5. He opts for the classical variation of the Dutch defense. And obviously we are in for a very interesting game. Kasparov goes g3. He wants to fianchetto his light square bishop. We have knight to f6, bishop to g2, and Tigran strikes with pawn to d5. Again, nothing weird happening. Still the classical line of the Dutch. Knight f3, bishop to e7. Castles, and pawn to b3. Kasparov saying that he will fianchetto the dark square bishop as well. Pawn to c6, and now queen to c2. Bishop to a3 is more popular nowadays, even though queen to c2 is still the top move recommended by the engine. I think everyone just knows this. This is now the Botvinnik Stonewall variation of the Dutch, and I guess it's just too popular, and it's very easy for black to defend. That's why I imagine people are looking for chances with bishop to a3. But okay, bishop to d7, we have bishop to b2, and bishop to e8. The bishop can now come to f7 or g6 if needed. Knight to e5, Kasparov claims the center for his knight, and knight b to d7. We have knight back to d3, declining the trade, and bishop to h5. Okay, just being very annoying. So, if you attack it, then the bishop might go back, but you have to take care of that e2 pawn. And there are a couple of games that reach this position, but here after knight to c3, it is now as of move 12 that this position has never been reached again. So we have new territory. I don't know the exact moment where someone played a new move for that time, for 1983, But yeah, here there are no more games in the database after knight to c3. Okay, we have bishop to d6. Getting the bishop to a better diagonal. Probably he was afraid if you play something, then Kasparov plays c5, and then you can no longer shift the bishop over to this diagonal. So okay, he goes bishop to d6, and Garry goes pawn to f3. Now c5, of course, if c5, the bishop of course comes to c7, so f3, looking for a potential future pawn to e4. We have bishop to g6 and pawn to e3. Rook to c8 by Tigran, and now Kasparov says, all right, that's a very nicely placed rook. I think I will just move my queen. Tigran says, okay, let's attack it again, or rather X-ray it again. And Kasparov says, okay, let's choose a different square. And now Tigran could definitely go for something like captures and strike with e5, but he doesn't. He just goes pawn to a6. We have rook 8 to c1 by Kasparov and queen to e7. We have rook f to e1 and queen to f8. Obviously not enjoying that rook X-raying the queen on e7. Kasparov brings the rook c to d1, and now Tigran goes for a trade in the center. We have captures, and now he goes for pawn to c5. And just to give you an example, e5, as we've already discussed it, is also very nice for black, but it's I imagine very difficult to assess. For example, pawn to c5, bishop comes to c7, and now f4. You will have a very firm grip on the position. It doesn't matter what you play. For example, you could trade, and then we just trade everything. But if you insist on closing the position, then knight comes to e5, obviously becomes an incredibly strong knight, plus d6 is very weak here. And after some sort of a trade, let's say captures and knight g4, yes, black knight is very powerful on g4, but it will get kicked away with h3. And first you move the queen, then you kick away the knight, and you still have... well, white just controls more space. It's very much playable, but Tigran decides to go for c5 instead. We have bishop to f1 by Kasparov, wanting to have that c pawn defended once Tigran opens up the position, as he wants to go after that c4 pawn. We have bishop to f7, and now knight to a4. Putting pressure on that c5 pawn. And we always joked around sort of as if you had a game between Tal and Petrosian, or let's say Nejmedinov and Petrosian, that it's like the immovable object meets unstoppable force. Well, with Kasparov, it's not quite as with Tal, as Kasparov is, his style is different than Tal's, but yeah, I guess, in those days, especially this younger generation versus older generation, I think it's also very exciting. We have C captures on d4, E captures on d4, and now the question is, should Tigran capture on c4? Well, the answer is yes, but also no. For example, if you capture on c4, what was Kasparov's idea? Well, obviously it has to do something with that bishop on f1 that he so conveniently placed. He was planning on going knight d to c5, and he of course wants to trap the rook. It's not possible to trap the rook because you will just go rook to b4, and after bishop to c3, you will first capture on c5, saying, okay, I don't mind giving up the rook for 2 pieces, but of course you will capture the bishop, and after rook to b6, you will attack it again, and after rook to c6, then finally you can capture on b7. And this is the position that you would get. Tigran would have 2 pawn islands, Kasparov 3 pawn islands, but it would be a Kasparov's bishop pair against, well, whatever Tigran's got left. So it would be interesting, but obviously you can play it. Tigran decides not to go for it. Maybe it was a bit too active of a position, goes pawn to b5 instead. Okay, we have C captures, A captures, and now knight A to c5 and pawn to b4. Saying that, okay, if Kasparov captures the pawn on b4, then Tigran can capture on c5, and he wins the game, because he just won a piece, and if Kasparov captures back, bishop captures... attacks the queen, and if you block it with the bishop, then you just capture the free knight, and again you end the variation up a piece. So b4 is a very nice way of keeping that pawn for the moment, at least, because Kasparov just plays rook to c1, and now how do you save the pawn? Well, Tigran could play rook to b8 and go into some sort of a passive position. Then let's say knight a6 attacks the rook, also attacks the pawn, rook to b6, and now something like knight e5, and it's very nice. You're not winning the pawn, at least not right away, but it's very hard for black to actually make a move, or rather, it's really, really hard for black to even think of a move here. So that's why most likely Tigran decided just to give up the pawn and to activate his pieces. Kasparov said, all right, first we're going to go bishop to h3, now also with the threat of just bishop captures as the queen is on e7, queen to d8, and now, only now Kasparov captures on b4. Tigran goes queen to a5, puts pressure on the b4 knight. We have knight to c6. And this is, I think this is the move that Tigran missed. Otherwise, you go into that other line. Kasparov plays knight to c6, and it, you know, at first glance, doesn't really make all that much sense because the knight can be captured, and it doesn't seem like there's a reply here. But of course, there is. Tigran captured it, but not in a way you would think. Tigran played queen captures on a2. Rook captures on c6 is actually the best defense, the one Kasparov offered. But I guess Tigran found a different one and said, okay, I'm not playing this. But the idea would be that you capture on d7. And then if rook captures on c1, you first capture on f6 with check. You mess up the black king's pawn structure. And then you capture on c1. So the queen also guards the a2 pawn. And you have this position where, okay, I guess, you know, chances for both sides, but white king could be a little bit safer than the black king, or maybe not. Maybe this is actually perfectly fine, but still there's the passed a pawn. It's definitely playable, and it's playable in more than one way. Tigran didn't like it. He played queen captures on a2, and now comes knight captures on d7. We have knight captures on d7 and pawn to d5. This is a very, very unique move. Other moves would give advantage over to Tigran. And now the problem is what to play here. That really does look like a free pawn, and it's hard not to capture it. Now, I'm just going to show you what would be the absolute best line here for Tigran, but definitely not an easy one to decide on. The absolute best would be knight to c5, which makes zero sense as you can just capture that knight. But that's exactly the point. Captures, captures, and captures, and after queen captures on b2, you have knight e7 check, which will win back the exchange. So rook captures on e7, queen captures on e8, c8, and now rook to e8. Attacks the queen, queen to c6, so you cannot capture, otherwise you're going to lose the game. Queen to d4 with check, and after, let's say, king g2, queen d2 check, you force the king back to defend the rook, and now you either repeat and get some sort of a repetition, or, you know, if black wants, black can even go for the attack with something like rook to b8. It's not going to be easy because white will always, you know, attack the rook, and if the rook moves, then you have a checkmate check, for example, bishop e8, and queen captures checkmate. So you would maybe something like rook to e8, queen to c6, and then a nice repetition here. So something like that. But yeah, it's very easy when, you know, the mighty Silicon Overlord shows us the way. Tigran did not go for that, even though, you know, if anyone could defend like an engine, it's definitely former world champion Tigran Petrosian. He chooses queen captures on d5, which is also perfectly fine. It just allows Kasparov active play, which is, you know, sometimes more dangerous than giving him material. So now Kasparov activates further. Rook e to d1. Attacking the queen, we have bishop to c5. Tigran counters back, attacking Kasparov's queen. Rook captures on d5, bishop captures on f2 with check, king captures, and e captures on d5. And this is the position. For the moment, you can see that Tigran is up the exchange, and Kasparov could immediately equalize. He could just go knight e7 check, and after captures, capture the rook on c8 with check. Rook goes back, and you trade everything, and you capture on f5, and that's it. Equal material. Maybe the d5 pawn is a little bit weak. Maybe not. Maybe it's just a passed pawn. So that's one option. But Kasparov says, no, let's keep the tension. He just plays bishop captures on f5. And what do you do now? The knight is hanging. Not a lot of good moves. You could give back the exchange with something like rook to b8, and then the knight can simply move. Or you play what Tigran played, and that is definitely objectively the best. He played knight to b6 and gave up the exchange on c8. So bishop captures, knight captures, and now bishop to a3. And this is the position. Equal material, no bishop pair for anyone. It's Kasparov's dark square bishop versus Tigran's light square bishop. So let's see what happens. Pawn to h6. We have rook to b1 and rook to e6, putting pressure on the knight on c6. We have knight to d4 and rook to a6. Okay, attacking the bishop, bishop to c5, and now knight to d6. We have rook to b8 with check, king to h7, and now pawn to g4. Kasparov preparing some sort of a pawn storm on the king side, and we'll try to pressure that black king. Unfortunately, we do not have the clock times for the tournament as it was played in 1984. It'd be great if we did, but we don't. We have rook to a4 by Tigran. Now saying, okay, let's trade. If you capture the knight here, I'm going to capture the knight here. And you could go for something like king to g3, let's say, but no, king to e3. Now the knight is defended, and you are threatening to capture the knight here. So knight c4 check. We have king to f4, and the position is still very much playable, but you have to, play something that doesn't affect the position that much, like knight a5 or even knight to d6. You can even play something like this, and then if rook b, obviously not rook b5. If rook b6 going after the knight, you will go rook c4 and sort of force a trade. Let's say captures, rook captures on c5, and it's much easier to hold a position with less material on the board. But something in Tigran wanted more. He wanted to beat the young World Chess Championship challenger with black, and he played pawn to g5 check. He wanted more than was possible, and the question is, what can Kasparov play now? There aren't a lot of moves here. There are only two options, but one of them wins the game and the other one loses the game. What would you play here? That is the question. Could you take down the former world champion from this position? Have at it while I give you a couple of seconds. Sometimes to go forward, you have to go backwards. Kasparov played king to g3. Had he gone king to f5, it would be a completely different story. And it's not maybe it's not that easy to spot even. Can you see the win here for black? It's literally like an instant win. So there's no defense. So the move is rook a6 and bishop g6 checkmate. There's no defense. The pawns are controlling the black king. Knight controls e5. The rook cuts off the king from the 6th rank. And one check, of course, if the king cannot move, equals checkmate. And if you try rook b7 to pin the bishop, then just king g7, defend the bishop, and now rook to f6, and unstoppable checkmate. Just amazing stuff here. If you go bishop here to prevent the rook from coming to f6, then the bishop again can move, and then bishop g6 is again checkmate. So it's a very nice find from Tigran, and he probably thought, okay, either I checkmate him or he has to go back, and then okay, that's also progress if the king goes back. But now after king to g3, now Tigran's king is a little bit vulnerable. So okay, we have rook to a2. Rook to b7, going after the bishop. Tigran defends. We have king to g6, and now knight to f5. And there is no defending this position. And really, it's very hard to even find moves for Tigran. He goes back, rook to a6, pawn to h4 by Kasparov, preparing pawn to h5. So, of course, g captures, knight captures with check. We have king to g7 and knight to f5 with check. And here we have king to g6. And again, the position is completely winning. There are many moves that you could play, but there is one that forces instant resignation. So for the last time, feel free to pause the video and show us the way, while I give you a couple of seconds. Of course, I have no doubt you guys found it. You guys are amazing players. It is bishop to d4. You could also start with some checks, but it doesn't really do anything. You would still have to, bring the knight back to f5 and find bishop to d4. So while other moves, are shown by the engine to be winning, it's only because you have to, drive the king back and forth before you actually play bishop to d4. And now there's no defense. The problem is the bishop now controls g7 and f6. So one check will force the black king away from the defense of the bishop. And that's it. There's nothing you can do here. Whatever you play, rook e6, it's a matter of a simple knight h4 check. And after king h7, you're going to capture the bishop. This cannot be avoided. And after king to g8, you will just move the rook wherever, doesn't matter. And you're up a full piece, up a full bishop. just enjoying life and having a completely winning game. So beautiful, beautiful game. Tigran played well, even better than well, on some occasions here in the game. But here, something in him just wanted more. He could have just repeated moves. Again, the problem, I don't have the clock times from 1983, but maybe he was below a minute. I don't know. But I doubt it, as time controls were very, very long. Even for regular tournaments, it was always 2 hours for the first 40 moves. Then you get additional time plus increment. So I don't know. I don't think it's that. I think he just wanted to beat Kasparov with black. So G5. But okay. Very nicely done by Kasparov. If you enjoyed this game, or even if you haven't, I'm still going to show the other games because it's a very nice tournament. Mostly we'll follow on who won the tournament, but if I see a nice game, or if you guys have a nice, know a nice game from this tournament, use that hashtag suggestion. Some of you think that I always say that, but I actually always, filter out all of the comments from every day. Just ask YouTube, show me everyone who wrote hashtag suggestion, and then I check out the games. I have my notepad file where I have all of the suggestions, and then I just eliminate them as I go through them. So it's a real thing. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Nikola Nenad Stankovic, Eric Vasquez, Thomas Pasternak, Ellen Chamberlain, and Seshadri Subramanian for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check upon your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.